I was playing at Van Dyke's one night, you know, maybe 10 years into my Van Dyke's gig, and there was a lady sitting there, you know, who loved the show. I mean, she flipped out with the show. And she came up to me and said, "Hey, have you ever done radio?" And I said, "No, no." He said, "Well, you got the voice for it, and you speak properly, you know, and you speak so well, you know, you would be a great radio guy. Your enunciation is great and everything." I said, "Okay." So she said, "I work for WDNA. Would you come tomorrow and visit us?" I said, "Okay." And I went to WDNA. I met, you know, the owner of the station and the manager. They introduced me to everybody, and they were so nice to me. And then I met Mike Valentine, everybody. To make a long story short, you know, they sat me in a desk immediately with a microphone, and I'm going, "Oh, whoa, what's going on?" You know? He says, "Talk in the mic," and I say who you are. And I said, "I'm Sammy Figueroa. I'm a musician, just like I did to you." And he goes, "Man, you sound great." I was, you know, I said, "What do I do?" He goes, "Well, are you willing to come here once a week, and we'll teach you how to use the board?" Right? Because every DJ here has to learn engineering a little bit, you know, just using the board. And I said, "Yeah," and I did it for 3 months. I was learning the board and the microphone, and I make mistakes up the wazoo. Forget it. I fucked up so many times that it was insane, you know? And I said, "Am I okay? Am I fired?" He goes, No, everybody makes those mistakes, because not only do you have to read, but you're manipulating, you know, this microphone, the calls that are coming in, and it was a little bit too much for me. But then I learned it. And then after 5 months, he says, "Okay, you're going to do the Latin Jazz Quarters." And that's a 3-hour show. And I said, "Oh my God, how am I going to do this?" And so I had all these records and all these CDs that were in the station, and I pulled them out, and I did my first show. "Hey everybody, I'm Sammy Figueroa. This is Latin Jazz Quarters," and blah, blah, blah. And it was easy, you know, and I put the CD in, and, you know, and then I had 3 CD players, so I had to, you know, do all that, you know. And so I got bored. I got bored after I did 6 shows. I started mixing it up and putting Brazilian music. Then I would put a jazz tune. Then I would put a song from Mexico, you know, just to, you know, I would put R&B and stuff like that. And then, you know, they forgave me, you know, that once, and I kind of did it very lightly. But by the 7th show, they said, you can't do that. This is a Latin jazz show, you know? You're playing rock and roll. I mean, what are you doing, you know? I go, "Okay, all right." So I went home, and I thought I was going to be fired, but I was already 1 year in. I was already 1 year in. So I said to myself, well, at least I did a year on radio, right? I could say that. They called me in for a meeting, and they had the board, you know, all the staff there. And I said, "Wow, you guys are going to fire me in a board meeting? You could have done that by email, you know?" And they said, no, Sammy, we're not firing you. We're giving you your own show." I said, "Really?" "Yeah, this way you can play what the hell you want. And you leave the Latin jazz show Latin jazz, you know? I'll give you a show. We're going to give you the worst possible day, which is Monday. That's the worst day, because people on Mondays don't listen to anything, you know? If you do good on that, you stay. If not, you go." I said, "Okay, fair enough." And I went there, and I prepared a show on my own at home, and I came back with this. I had, you know, George Duke, this guy, you know, I played all the stuff that I would listen to at home. Not for the people, just for me. And I put all this stuff together with rhythms, Cuba, everything, right? Puerto Rico. And no word. I went home. I went back. Rachel's son, "How did it go?" I went, "I think okay. They haven't said anything." I did a 2nd show, a 3rd show, a 4th show. 6 or 7. I said, wow, must be okay. By the 11th show, they called me back in, and that's when I thought, now I'm fired. Now I'm fired, you know? And this is going to be fun, you know? So called me in, and they were paying for this company that does graphs, ratings, right? And in those days, those graphs were very expensive, extremely expensive. Graphs, you know, this DJ did this much, this DJ did this and this one. And it shows you a graph of how good you do and how terrible you do. And so he said, okay, this is Monday. This is Frank Consola. See, he's up here. This is this guy. This is the Latin Jazz Quarter. They were like kind of even, you know, maybe a little bit. And this is you. And it was red and all the way at the top. And I said, that's me? He goes, yes, you're in. Now I've been there 24 years. And I have my own show. Not only that, but from an hour, now they gave me 2 hours. And I'm on Sundays from 8 to 10, which is the best slot you can get. But it took me those 23 years to finally graduate from school, you know? So that's how my radio started. And it was by a lady named Fitzgerald, who, she was the one that got me into the radio thing. And then she's gone, she disappeared, she left, and I'm still in WDNA.